Hi there, welcome to Class at Criswell College. My name is Brandon Seitzler. I am an associate professor of political science and economics, and I am the program director of our PPE program, PPE being philosophy, politics, and economics, all of which we're going to see a little bit in today's lecture. So today I have the privilege of doing what we call our mock lecture. The mock lecture is something that we do for every day, every preview day here at Criswell College. We definitely do it for the on-campus events, but we're going to do it for the virtual events also. We want to do that for y'all who can't be with us here on campus today. So this is my privilege. I get to spend this time with you. Today's topic is going to be maybe a little bit different than what you would expect to get at Criswell College. I think that when a lot of people think Criswell College, they think, Bible and theology, and we certainly do a lot of that. But we strongly believe here at Criswell that no matter what field you're going into after you graduate, be that the ministry, and by that I mean, a pastoral, vocational ministry in a church with a pulpit, or working for a corporation, working for a city, state, federal government, working for a nonprofit, no matter what you're doing, you have the opportunity to do ministry, and you're doing God's work by doing that thing. So that's one of the reasons that it's really, really exciting to get to do kind of a political science, economic, philosophical sort of lecture today for a mock lesson, to kind of see how Criswell views the way that those other fields also contribute to our understanding of God's God's world, and how we can serve others. So again, today's lecture is on game theory, and let's see, right here we have my name. This is my email address. You'll have this again at the end of the presentation, I believe. So feel free to reach out to me anytime, and let's get started. So what is game theory? Good question. Game theory is a field that is used across just about all of the social sciences, used in mathematics, used in philosophy, used in biology, believe it or not, used in business, marketing, used in military studies. So game theory is one of those fields that at this point has become less of a discipline and more of a tool that all sorts of fields use to better understand their world. So I think the best way to describe game theory is to start with the definition of economics itself. So here we have economics, and that it is the study of how rational actors make decisions to maximize their utility in the face of scarcity. Now there's a lot there, not only a lot of words for a definition, but also a lot of things that you should maybe be a little bit weary of, that you should say, hey, well, back up a little bit. Before we move on, I need you to explain what you mean with some of those words. And that's a fair question. Good for you if you're asking it. I underlined some of them here. So one is rational. What the heck do we mean by rationality? We see in society all the time. It's incredibly possible for one person to look at another person and tell them that they're behaving entirely irrationally, when in fact that person would say, hey, I'm being nothing but rational in this situation. Second word that I underlined is actors, right there. This is a pretty big assumption, somewhat obvious, but that just being that we do act, that our actions matter, that we have agency, that meaning that we're not being controlled by other people, by another force, that we do get to make our own choices in this world. Now I realize that at theological college that could open up a whole different can of worms. We're not going to get into that conversation here, but for these purposes we're going to assume that people can actually act to make decisions. Decisions, that's a huge word, because decision implies one choice over another thing. So it's very rare that you just walk into the world and, well, your path is just obvious right there before you. What else would you have done other than, path A? Even if the other path is a path of non-decision or a path of non-action, that other path is another option. It is therefore path B, right? So you do choose path A or path B, not just path B. So we're always making decisions. We're making decisions constantly in life. You make decisions from the moment you wake up in the morning. Do I hit the snooze button one more time and possibly be late for class, possibly get stuck in traffic. Or do I get up, get out the door, and be responsible, right? I mean, as soon as that alarm goes off, we're making decisions. To maximize their utility. This is kind of an economic-y kind of word, right? So economists get really into the idea of utility, and there are a couple of different things that we could mean by this. So we're going to talk about this later in the lesson also. And then finally, in the face of scarcity. That's a big one, scarcity. Here's why that's big. My students joke about this every single semester. They joke about this ongoing throughout the degree program. That is that one of my big rants on the first day of microeconomics is that scarcity is not the same thing as poverty. I used a textbook a few years ago that I'm no longer using, not for this reason, for some other reasons. I'm not using this textbook, I switched, but the old textbook, on the front page, right, so not the cover, but the front page, the very first thing students would learn is learn the economic problem. The economic problem is this problem right here of scarcity, right, and learn this definition of economics. And next to the definition, they put a picture of a homeless person. Now, it is certainly sad that that person was homeless, but that's very misleading to students because in economics, it's important for us to distinguish between scarcity and poverty. Poverty can sometimes be caused by scarcity, but they are not one and the same concept. They don't have to be caused. Poverty doesn't have to be the cause of scarcity. In other words, and this is so key for us to remember, is that Bill Gates himself, Mark Zuckerberg, right, Warren Buffett, some of the richest people in the world, these are people who every single day have to deal with the problem of scarcity. And a good way for us to think about this is to go back to the example I gave just a second ago, that being as soon as you wake up in the morning, you're making decisions. The whole reason you're making decisions, in other words, the whole reason that scarcity matters goes back up there to decisions, right? Decisions matter because of scarcity. In other words, the resource that is scarce for absolutely all of us, regardless of age, race, gender, nationality, creed, color, is time. We all know that all of us have only 24 hours in the day, and this impacts Bill Gates just as much as it impacts me, Dr. Seitzler sitting here, and you sitting there by your TV, your phone, or computer, right? Right now, you're making the decision to watch this lecture. Thank you for that, by the way, to watch this lecture and to spend your time with us here at Criswell College, rather than doing whatever else you could be doing. That's the exact same decision that Bill Gates has to make in the morning, right? And it doesn't necessarily make him poor. It's just something that he has to deal with. So we have economics, we have rational, actors, decision, maximize utility, face of scarcity. All of these things are absolutely huge, but this isn't a lesson just on the definition of economics. This is ultimately a lesson on game theory. So let's move down to that. Now we have game theory, a tool to study how two or more rational actors make decisions interdependently and strategically to maximize their utility in the face of scarcity. Well, there were a lot more words in that, but what I want us to really focus on is the fact that there were some pretty similar words in the definition to game theory that there were in the definition to economics. In other words, let's go back to this. So a tool to study how two or more rational actors, so we still have actors, they're still rational, they're still making decisions. Now they're making decisions interdependently and strategically. You could say strategically because it is interdependent, to still maximize their utility in the face of scarcity. So what's new here? Let's go back to this. Study how two or more rational actors interdependently and strategically. I don't know if I have any baseball players watching this, but I was a baseball player, so I'll use baseball as an example. Let's say that you have a guy or a gal step up to the plate, they're hitting, they step up there, they're a right-handed batter, I'm a right-handed batter, so I'll play righty for now. You stand up, you're right-handed, and the coaching staff for the team that's in the field right now, the defense, the coaching staff is looking at their stats on this player, and they say, this guy or this gal, they can only pull the ball to left field, right? So pull it to left field versus push it to right field. They can never hit the ball to right field, right? Like they just can't aim it out that way. They just always pull it around to left field. In other words, this person's just kind of a one-trick pony, which isn't a good thing, by the way, in sports, right? You can only do one thing. That means you're predictable, which means it's always easy to play defense against you. So what do you do if somebody steps up to the plate who always pulls the ball to left field? Well, you shift your entire infield and your entire outfield towards that third base left field side. It's just it's obvious. And you're doing that not independently of the person at the plate. You're doing that interdependently. In other words, because you know something about the person who's standing at the plate, you're now going to act, right? You're going to make a decision to do something new, and you're doing that because you think it will, to speak like an economist or a nerd, maybe those are one and the same, nerd and economist, to speak like an economist, you do it because you think by shifting your entire field over to that left field third base side, you're going to maximize your utility. That is, catch the ball, get an out, throw the person out, however you're going to go about doing it. So game theory then, we see game theory is very, very similar to economics, right? The difference is, instead of studying one person, which economists study even without game theory, study more than just one person all the time, but economics, just at its most basic level, on the first day of class, I go in saying, all right, just pretend we have one person on an island, just one person. What's that one person gonna do? In game theory, we get a little bit more real, right? So how do we get real? Well, we go from assuming that we have one person, right? So a bunch of rational actors just floating around in society, to all of a sudden saying, wait a minute, that's not how life works at all. In fact, the way that life works is you have these individual rational actors who are constantly bumping into one another over and over and over again, right? That may seem a little bit harsh, especially the fists and everything. But let me give you an example of that, right? Just this week, you might have been driving in your car somewhere. Today, you might have been driving. And what do you see on the road? You see other cars. If it's not for rules, if it's not for regulations, those cars, if it's not for stoplights, if it's not for self-control on your part and the part of the other drivers, those cars are going to bump into one another, right? You have multiple rational actors all making decisions that they wouldn't otherwise make. In other words, a stop sign. We'd like to think that we would all stop at a stop sign no matter what, right? We're good, law-abiding citizens. You stop at a stop sign when you come up to one. But you're probably a little bit more likely to roll through that stop sign. In other words, not completely stop if you don't see any other cars around, right, who you might bump into. All of a sudden, your behavior is going to change, especially if one of those cars isn't a police officer. If it's a police officer, you're probably even more likely to stop. Now, if any police officers are watching this, please know that regardless of whether anybody else is at the stop sign, I always stop, because I am a good law-abiding citizen. Remember this. Now, finally, game theory. It is a tool. It's simply one tool of many that the economist, that the political scientist, that the social scientist, the biologist puts in our tool bag, right? Puts in our tool bag or our tool belt. It's a tool that we use to help us understand society better. So, what's it helping us understand? Well, let's start thinking about these economic foundations. And I'm going to quote a famous economist named F.A. Hayek, who said this. He said, "Nobody can be a great economist who is only an economist. And I am even tempted to add that the economist who is only an economist is likely to become a nuisance, if not a positive danger." So we're going to use game theory so that we can be better economists and be better political scientists and better philosophers, right? And I think that F.A. Hayek's quote applies to all of these fields. In fact, this is the core tenet of the philosophy, politics, and economics, the PPE program that I direct, is that we say we can't actually do a good job of any of these disciplines if we don't understand something about all the other disciplines. So this drives us back to our foundations. This drives us back to some philosophical foundations, namely philosophical foundation 1, rationality, philosophical foundation 2, utility. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into these very briefly And then we're going to play some games together. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit different than if we were able to meet in person. But I'm going to kind of explain to you the way that the game works and kind of show you the way that it ends up playing out. Spoiler alert, if you end up having the class with me, but spoiler alert, but we're going to show you what ends up happening. It's pretty interesting. The idea is for it to tell us something about society, right? But before we can learn that thing, what it's going to tell us about society, we have to learn a little bit more about these, right? These, I've scribbled all over this now, right? But these rational decisions, scarcity, actor kind of choices that we made. So rationality, and utility. That's where we're going next. So let's look at rationality. So what is a rational or an irrational action? We could spend entire courses, entire units, we could spend weeks and weeks on this question. But what we're going to emphasize here is that a rational action is goal-oriented behavior. In other words, what we're going to kind of call instrumental rationality is that there's something out there that you want, and your action is rational if you believe it is a good way of getting that thing, right? So let's go back to our baseball example, because this is key, because you might not always be successful. So let's go back to our baseball example. Let's say that you have stats on the player who steps up to the plate. And the stats say, hey, this guy or this gal, they always pull the ball to your third base, to your left field side. You should shift everybody over, okay? So far, rational, right? We know what you want to do. You want to catch the ball. You want to field the ball. You want to throw them out, whatever, however the play is going to play out. We know what you want to do. We know the stats about the player. So it only makes sense that you're going to shift everybody over. Now, what happens if this guy or gal steps up to the plate and sure enough has been practicing over the summer or over the spring or winter, whenever the ball season is, fall ball, spring ball, whatever you're playing, they've been practicing in the previous season. You haven't collected stats on them. Maybe it's the first game of the year, and they rip that ball to right field, lands right in a gap, rolls all the way to the foul pole. They get up like a standing triple at the end of this thing. Was the team in the field all of a sudden not rational? No, based on our definition, they were rational, and here's why. Because regardless of whether they were successful, in other words, we're not going to adopt a definition that would be rationality as effectiveness, right? Regardless of whether they were effective in getting the person out, they're rational because they took an action. Their action is rational because they took an action that they genuinely believed was the best way of fulfilling their goals or achieving their goals in this baseball game. So it was a rational action. Two, and this is connected to everything we've been talking about, just that people have goals, right? So rational or irrational action is connected to the goals people have. In other words, before I can know whether your behavior is rational, I have to know something about what it is that you value as a person. What is it that you're trying to achieve? This is a question that I ask my son all the time, who's 3 years old, right? So he's doing something in the house. It usually involves, having some kind of a random piece of wood or cardboard box or pillows, and he's trying to make a bridge, it seems, from the couch to the fireplace or to the table, right? And I'll often walk up to him, and he thinks he's about to get in trouble. He often is. But I walk up to him and I say, hey, buddy, what's going on here? And he goes, blah, 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 right? Tries to get himself out. And I go, what is your goal? What are you trying to achieve? Because it's entirely possible he's trying to achieve an entirely benign goal that I can help him with. If so, I'll help him. If not, like I said, he's usually getting in trouble. So moving on, people have goals. People are able to choose and act freely. We talked about this earlier. We're assuming this into this entire process, that people are capable of doing what they want to do. And then people choose actions that will help them achieve their goals. These are things that we just discussed a second ago. So next we have utility. We'll move really fast through this. Preferences. So again, we discussed this earlier too when we were talking about decisions. Preferences and decisions imply that somebody is never simply saying, well, I'll put it like this. Imagine if somebody walked up and said, I prefer pizza. Right? You would say, oh, that's great. You prefer it to what? And they said, well, nothing. I just prefer it. Right? Preference language is the kind of language that we use when we're discussing utility because we are always assuming a decision, right? We're always assuming that you're choosing one thing over another thing, right? And that the thing you choose presumably is going to bring you more utility than the thing you didn't choose. So there are two different ways of discussing utility. And again, we're not going there's a lot of math that you can get into with this that gets pretty interesting. And we'll discuss that stuff in class. Here I'm just going to kind of give you a taste of it. I realized that I probably just scared everybody off saying math is something interesting that we're going to get into in class. I promise it's not going to be scary math. It's just kind of interesting math where you go, that is kind of fun how that gets us from one place to another, just philosophically thinking about the way something works. Let me explain. So, ordinal utility. What would ordinal utility be? If you say that you prefer pizza to hot dogs to hamburgers, okay? I would say, all right, I think I've got your order. So pizza to hot dogs to hamburgers. So pizza is in the number 1 position. What did I say? Hot dogs? Hot dogs are in the number 2 position. And then hamburgers are in the number 3 position. Pizza, hot dogs, hamburgers, right? I keep forgetting. Pizza, hot dogs, hamburgers. 1, 2, 3. We have an order. We know the order in which you prefer each of these foods. Now, I'll ask you a question. Think through the question. I can't, ask you live in class, but just think through it and think about how you would answer this. Student A, student, X, whatever. How much more do you like pizza than hot dogs? Oh, well, I don't know, a little bit more? Well, just how much little bit more? Like 2 bits more? 1 bit more? I don't know. I just like pizza more, right? And in fact, that's all you can tell me. That's all you can tell me using ordinal utility. You can simply say 1, pizza, 2, hot dogs, and then 3, burger, right? So this is ordinal utility. You just tell me the order that they occur in. Now, all of a sudden, when we get to cardinal utility, here's what we're doing. We're saying that pizza, hot dogs, and burgers are still 1, 2, 3, right? So that's fine. In fact, we can put it in parentheses, 1, 2, 3. But now when I ask you the question, how much more do you like pizza than hot dogs? You can tell me, right? Times 2. You like pizza twice as much as hot dogs. Interesting. How much more do you like hot dogs than burgers? Well, times 3. I like hot dogs 3 times more than burgers. And this seems maybe reasonable, maybe unreasonable. For those of you to whom this seems reasonable, I would ask you this question. How do you know you like pizza twice as much as you like hot dogs? In other words, twice as much what? Is there a way that we're measuring our pleasure, or a way that we're measuring our utility, or a way that we're measuring our hungry, right? Our hungry. I'm twice as hungry for a pizza than I am a hot dog, right? These are things that are really difficult to measure. But again, these are things that we call them auctions in terms of like, all right, if you could trade 1 penny for this, there's all kinds of math that we get into, but that we actually kind of, sort of, maybe question mark, it's debatable, can order these in a cardinal way, say how much more we like one thing than another. Now, there are a couple of games that I want us to play. One was the ultimatum game. I'm actually going to skip that because we're running out of time. I'm going to move straight on to the prisoner's dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma is probably the most famous game, I'm going to use nerd language again, the most famous game theoretic model in game theory, and it goes like this. It has a story behind it. It says, okay, you got 2 criminals. We're going to call these criminals, wait for it, they're my kids' names, my kids who are, 3 years old and 1 month old. So my kids are not criminals, but they've got good names. We gave it to them. So their names are Matthew and Claire, right? So we have Matthew and Claire, and we see them down at the First National Bank. I don't know if there is such a place. First National Bank in downtown Dallas. They're just hanging out. A couple of, kids hanging out outside the bank. And the bank teller calls the police on them, right? Now, you might ask yourself, why would the bank teller call the police on these innocent kids hanging out outside the bank? They're older now in the story. They're not 3 and 1 month old anymore. So calls the police on these kids. Well, it turns out it's because they're wearing ski masks over their faces. And they say, hey, around these parts in Dallas County, you're not allowed to wear a ski mask outside of a bank. Seems like a reasonable rule. So you call the police station. They send a squad car over there. They pick up Matthew, pick up Claire. They put them in separate squad cars, and they take them to the county jail, right? They take them to the jail where they put them both in separate interrogation rooms, and they start talking to them. Now, they're going to make each of these crooks, presumably, right, innocent until proven guilty, of course, right, the political science, the philosophy side of all this. We're assuming that these people are innocent of at least one crime. But here's the deal that we make. And they again, make this exact same deal to each of the criminals in separate rooms at the exact same time. They go up to him. Let's say they go up to Matthew first. They go up to Matthew. Well, again, same time, but we'll do it with Matthew. You walk up to Matthew and you say, okay, buddy, look here. And it's easier for me to say this, right? Because I often go to Matthew and say, look, buddy, look right here. Look, buddy, we caught you outside of this bank. Now, there has been a whole string of bank robberies all over this county. We don't have solid evidence on who it is. We just see these people running away, right? But they match y'all's description, yours and Claire's description. We just don't have enough evidence to put you two away on these major, bank robbery charges yet. However, we do have enough evidence to put you away for a crime, let's say a lesser crime like, robbing a convenience store, something like that. So these convenience store charges, maybe without a deadly weapon or something, right? So just robbing a convenience store, or you just go in and you steal some candy bars. We can put you away on that, but we can't yet put you away on these bank robbery charges. And of course, that's what you want to get them on, is the big charges. So you say, I'm going to make you a deal, Matthew. And you tell him, you say, I'm making the exact same deal to Claire, who is in the other room right now. Okay, exact same deal. If you keep quiet, okay, you, Matthew, so the deal is to Matthew right now. If you keep quiet and Claire, keeps quiet. If both of you keep quiet, you get 2 years each. You're both going to get 2 years in the slammer. But here's the thing. We know that y'all did it. We know that you robbed these banks. And Matthew, here's the thing, buddy. I know that your baby sister is the real criminal here, right? She's just dragging you along to try to get you into this life of crime. Hey, that's not you. That's not who you are. Go ahead and tell us. Make the confession. And if you do, this is the deal we'll make to you. If you confess, you will get 0 years, right? 0 years. And if they keep quiet, we're making her the same deal right now. If she keeps quiet while you confess, she's going to get 10 years. But hey, man, I'm telling you, like I just said, we're making her the same deal. If you keep quiet while she confesses, you're getting 10 years. She's getting 0 years. Make your decision fast, though. Because if you both end up confessing, if my partner and I walk out of these rooms at the exact same time and we have 2 confessions, guess what happens? You are both getting 8 big years. So, what do you do? What do you do? Now, before I tell you to pause this video, assuming you can pause this video, I'm not quite sure what you're looking at, but you can always, go back, maybe watch a recording later. Before you do anything like that, I want you to see, not this slide, but this slide right here. This puts it in what's considered the game in what's called strategic form. And it lays out all of our options really clean right here in front of us. Now, I want you to think what you would do from Matthew's perspective, what you would do. I'm going to go ahead and tell you. What we do, if you're Matthew or Claire, because again, notice that these are mirror images of one another, right? So all these payoffs are the same. And payoffs is what we call these. And also note that these numbers are prison sentences. So prison is like golf. You want the lowest number possible. So remember, the low number is what you're going for here. Okay, so let's think about what our options are then. Let's think about what Matthew's considering from his perspective. And again, remember that that the options are mirror images of one another here. So Matthew is trying to decide if he should keep quiet or confess. So what he does is say, okay, let's say I'm living in a world, right? So we're kind of positing different universes here. Let's say that I'm living in the sort of universe where Claire keeps quiet. So he says, all right, what are my options? Now, Matthew, you'll see his name is in blue and his payoffs are always in blue. And he wants the lowest number, right? So he's saying, all right, I'm in this world in which Claire keeps quiet. Now what should I do? Keep quiet myself or confess? Well, this is pretty easy. Do you want 2 years in jail or do you want 0 years in jail? You want 0 years in jail. So Matthew says, if Claire keeps quiet, which I don't know if she is, right? But let's start there. If she is keeping quiet, I know that I'm going to confess. Now, let's say that Claire is going to confess. Let's say there's some way that he knows she's definitely going to confess, right? If he knows that, then what should he do? Can we figure it out now? Well, yeah, he then is looking between 10 years and 8 years in jail. Again, what does he want to do? Well, he wants to get the fewest years possible, so he chooses the 8 years, which means regardless of whether Matthew thinks Claire is going to confess here, or keep quiet, he says, I am definitely going to confess. Okay? Claire, the exact same way. Hers are in green. She says, let's say Matthew's going to keep quiet. Do I want 2 years or 0 years? Well, of course she wants 0 years. Do I want 10 years if he confesses, if I know he's going to confess? Do I want 10 years or do I want 8 years? Well, of course, she wants 8 years rather than 10 years. Now you'll see the only box where we have 2 circles. In other words, the box where no matter what anybody else does, everyone kind of ends up there, is this one right here at confess, which means everybody's going to get 8 years in jail. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, that stinks. There must, right? So it's like an infomercial. There must be a better way. Well, we're gonna debate that. We're gonna see if there's a better way. But for now, I want to tell you that you're on the right track. You're barking up the right tree. Hence the name Prisoner's Dilemma. This is where the dilemma comes in, because you saw yourselves, right? You said they're getting 8 years in jail. How stupid could they be? There has to be a better way. If they can both just make a deal, right? If they come up with a way to both keep quiet, then they could get 2 years each, right? They could cut their prison sentences in quarters, right? It would be so much better that way. But it's not that way. We just said, right? No matter what either person does, we know what's best for the other person to do, for them to confess, which is why they end up here at 8-8, confess. That's the best choice from Matthew's perspective. It's the best choice from Claire's perspective, and we wouldn't expect anything else. You should be thoroughly depressed right now. I'm depressed right now. Let's see if we can get ourselves undepressed together. So we solved the prisoner's dilemma. There's a couple of technical terms that we're going to just cover here right now, because it wouldn't be a real game theory lecture if I didn't give you these terms. But we'll talk about it more in class when you come to Criswell College. So the first term we're going to learn is Nash Equilibrium. Well, we just found that big circle, the right here, the 8-8. That is a Nash equilibrium because neither Matthew nor Claire, were incentivized. They had no reason to change their play, to change their decision, without the other player also changing. But we saw that neither player has an incentive to change without the other player changing, but we saw that there's no reason any player would ever want to change, right? So for the exact same reason, hence them being stuck in that dilemma. So what we found was a Nash equilibrium. Now, so that's the Nash equilibrium. That's our solution. Here's the dilemma part of it, is that it is a Pareto suboptimal Nash equilibrium. Pareto optimality. Pareto optimal is when there is no other solution in which a player can improve without making another player worse off. Well, this is not a Pareto optimal solution. It is a Nash equilibrium, but it's not a Pareto optimal Nash equilibrium. In fact, it's very suboptimal because we see there's absolutely another solution right here that they could choose, and it would not make another player worse off. Now, there are some objections that we get anytime we do this class, and I'm sure if we were all together in a classroom right now, somebody might bring these up, and these are good objections. They're reasonable. One of them is this: can't you just coordinate your way out of the equilibrium? In fact, I have students who want to do this all semester. In fact, if you are in the class and a student does this, let them do it, right? Because we can just kind of watch and see how it plays out so we can all learn. That is this: can't we just coordinate our way out of the equilibrium? To which we say, yeah, let's give it a try. Let's see what happens, right? And so Matthew and Claire, Bobby and Susie, whoever's in the class there, say, all right, Susie, I promise you, I'm going to keep quiet. Just you keep quiet also, so that we can both have the 2 years, right? So they're coordinating their way out of it. And then they say, all right, now we're going to write down our answer. We're going to write down what we should do. Well, what do you think is going to happen? We already saw that even if you think the other person is going to keep quiet, you're better off confessing, because then you get 0 years and they get 2 years, right? So nope, not a way out. It doesn't help us. Another objection: what if I'm a super nice person who always puts others first? That is entirely possible. Right, that's entirely possible. And if that's the case, you're not playing the prisoner's dilemma. You have a different set of payoffs. In other words, remember what we said about rationality earlier. You have a completely different set of goals. And good for you if that's the case, right? If you're saying, no, I'd rather put someone else first rather than make sure that I get a smaller prison sentence. No, if you're going to try to cooperate with someone else, that's great. But that means you're not playing a prisoner's dilemma. So, is there any hope for cooperation? Or are we stuck in what Thomas Hobbes calls the state of nature, right? Here's what Thomas Hobbes says in the Leviathan about the state of nature. He says, in such, we're reading right here together. He says, in such a condition, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time. That's a big one there, like no account of time. Like we don't know what time it is. Yeah, that's how bad it is in Hobbes' state of nature. No account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear in the danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So that's Thomas Hobbes' perspective on the state of nature, and we see that his perspective ends up being pretty stinking close to the prisoner's dilemma. The question that we ask ourselves at this point is that reality? Is that life? And is there a way out of this thing? There was a man named Robert Axelrod. Still is. Sorry, he's still alive. He's a professor at University of Michigan. There is a man named Robert Axelrod who said, yeah, I think maybe there is, right? And he came up with this idea, the iterated prisoner's dilemma. An iterated prisoner's dilemma is when you say, let's do this prisoner's dilemma game, but let's play this game, right, where it's game theory. Let's play this game multiple times and see what we come up with. Let's see how it goes. Now, there are possible strategies that he got. So sorry, the way that he ended up doing it was that he sent letters to famous economists, game theorists, political scientists, sociologists, biologists, computer scientists, mathematicians, right, all over the world, anyone who uses game theory, and said, write me a program, an algorithm, right? So like an if this then that kind of system where you have a strategy that you think is going to beat all of the other strategies for the prisoner's dilemma, right? So he told them what we're going to do is like a round robin tournament. Think like March Madness, kind of like, basketball style tournament where we're going to throw everyone in together and we're going to kind of have like a survival of the fittest sort of system. Like see like what game ends up going all the way to the end and scoring more points, or you could say having the lower prisoner lower prison sentence than any other game, right? So like, what strategy is going to be the best strategy? So he sends these letters off. He gets hundreds and hundreds of replies from the best professors around the world who say like, I think my strategy is going to win, and just give you an idea of kind of like the extreme strategies. One is always be mean, right? So you can imagine what always be mean is. Always be mean is when you say, I'm just going to confess every single time to the crime, right? Just like try to send the other person to jail, send them to jail, send them to jail, send them to jail. The other one is always be nice. Always be nice. How lovely, right? Just like, nope, I'm always going to keep quiet. I'm not going to confess. I'm going to play nice with everybody else. This is the way I'm going to roll. So there's just kind of two extremes. Others are, like every other time, if like I'll always be nice unless someone's mean, then I'm always mean back to them. You'll have various strategies like that. But those are the kind of the two options. You know what? Maybe I shouldn't tell you. No, I'll tell you. I'll tell you the one that ended up winning the entire thing. I should make you go ahead and come sign up for my class at Criswell so that you can learn the strategy that wins. The strategy that wins is tit for tat. Tit for tat is a strategy that says, here's how we're going to play this. I'll start off nice. I'll start off cooperating with you. Then in the next game that I play with you, if you keep being nice, I'll be nice also. But if you are mean, meaning you defect, or you say, you confess to the crime, however the game's structured, you confess to the crime, then I'll be mean back to you. But I'll only be mean one time, only enough to basically say, hey, I'm not going to take your nonsense. I'm not going to put up with it, but I'm going to let you know I'll go back to being kind after this one time, right? So it's just kind of like a slap on the hands, now we can be friends again. So you just always do what the other person did on the previous move. You basically just mirror their behavior back to them. That was tit for tat. And it's what ends up winning the entire tournament, right? It's like this really successful strategy that he found. So he finds that there actually is a way to get ourselves out of, where are we? Get our way. We're very scribbled up at this point. Get ourselves out of this, 8 years, confess strategy. And it was tit for tat. And we found it in the iterated prisoner's dilemma. But here's what we end up struggling with here, is whether or not that's actually the same as the original prisoner's dilemma, right? It may be a very interesting game in and of itself. The question is whether or not it is actually the same game. The answer is, and we're not going to get into it here, but again, the math of it, right? When you look at the math, you look at the way this works logically, no, it's actually not the same game. It actually is a spin on the other game. So the question for us, right, in closing, the sorts of questions that we're asking in the PPE program at Criswell, that all professors are asking at Criswell, right? We're looking at humanity. We're looking at the human condition. We're looking at the world around us. We're opening up scripture, right? We're looking at Aristotle. We're looking at Shakespeare. We're looking at the Bible, right? We're looking at text. We're looking at the world, at human behavior. And we're saying, what kind of world do we live in? What kind of world did God create? What sort of world have we created with the tools that God gave us? Have we created a world or maintained a world that is the kind of world God would have wanted us to maintain, right? So these are the sorts of really big, heavy questions we're asking, right, about the human condition, about like the state of humanity, the state of the soul, right? And the question that I'll ask you now in closing is, when you look at the world around you, in fact, we make it easy. Let's just say the United States at the year 2020. When you look at the United States in the year 2020, we'll look around. What do you see? Do we see the Hobbesian state of nature, right? It's like have like a one-off prisoner's dilemma? Or do we see a situation that's more like Robert Axelrod's iterated prisoner's dilemma, where we have constant interactions over and over again? Well, I'll go ahead and give you my answer. I think what we actually see is something more similar to the iterated prisoner's dilemma. In other words, you go shopping at a store, right? Or you go to a class with a professor, right? And you have an interaction with that person. But then you go and you have another interaction and another interaction and another interaction. And every interaction that we have is premised not on the idea that we can get as much from somebody else that we can, right? That we can be selfish, that we can take for ourselves. But it's always premised on this idea. Hopefully it is, right? This is what would make you, not a sociopath, right? Hopefully it's premised on this idea that you're in fact going to see this person more in the future, that you can build a relationship with this person. And that in building a relationship, everybody can be built up and end up achieving more as a society and flourishing more as a society because we've chosen to cooperate, because we've chosen to work together. So yes, I think Robert Axelrod's world is more like the world I see around me than Thomas Hobbes's world, and maybe that just makes me an eternal optimist. But I'll go ahead and be one for today. That is all. Thank you so much for being here. If you have questions about any of this, I realize we flew through this really fast, which is kind of what I give you an idea of, kind of like big, touchy-feely, humanity kind of questions that we ask at Criswell. Dive into the technical side of things, like say, all right, is there, where's the rigor behind this? Where's like the meat and potatoes? What are we really talking about? And then come out on the other end, seeing again where, this stuff does teach us something about God's world. It teaches us about the world we live in. So hopefully we achieve some of that. Hopefully this was enjoyable for you. It was enjoyable for me. Again, my name, Brandon Seitzler. My email address right here, bseitzler@criswell.edu. Feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to email me. I would love to stay in touch. I'd love to answer any questions you have about Criswell, about the PPE program. I'd love to help you get in and help you be successful in it, or answer any questions you have about game theory. So thank you very much. Have a blessed day. Bye.